Welcome, everyone. Tonight, we are going to begin a three-part mini-series on the worlds of Tohu, Tikkun, and Shvirat Hakeilim. The worlds of Tohu, sometimes called the world of chaos, a previous world, the world of rectification, the world of Tikkun, and the concept of Shvirat Hakeilim, breaking the vessels. I thought of this because we're in the 3 weeks, and the 3 weeks begin, it was a fast day on Sunday, Yud Zayin B'Tammuz. Actually, this year, Yud Zayin B'Tammuz was on Shabbat, and we do not fast on Shabbat, other than when Yom Kippur comes out on Shabbat. So the fast was pushed off till Sunday, which was the 18th of Tammuz. But it begins with a fast day, and 3 weeks from now, it will culminate in Tisha B'Av, which is a fast day. These are called the 3 weeks. And it begins, we're told in the Mishnah that 5 things occurred on the 17th of Tammuz. The first one, though, that stamped the energy of this day for all generations was the breaking of the first tablets of the law. When Moshe came down from Har Sinai and saw the people dancing around a golden calf, so he broke the tablets. And then throughout history, many things happened in Yud Zayin B'Tammuz, especially that the Babylonians were able to break through the walls of Jerusalem and eventually reached the temple on Tisha B'Av and destroyed the temple. And also at the time of the Romans, the second temple was also destroyed on Tisha B'Av. So we see here a theme of breaking. It's call it the hardest 3 weeks of the year. We actually go into different customs of semi-mourning. And as we get closer to Tisha B'Av, the 9 days before Tisha B'Av, it strengthens the mourning practices, and the week of Tisha B'Av even more. So I felt it was appropriate to discuss the concept of Shvirat Hakeilim, which we've discussed many times in different contexts, and probably everyone has heard of. And the way I want to do it is in the following way. Since we're at the beginning of the 3 weeks, one of the most important general principles, one of the fundamentals, our whole series this year is called Fundamentals of Kabbalah and Chassidut. One of the absolute fundamentals of Chassidut is that every idea, every concept, every mitzvah, every story in the Torah, we have to personalize. We have to be able to relate to it in our own lives in contemporary terms. So Shvirat Hakeilim, as we will review now, this is part of the Kabbalistic cosmology of the Arizal. But what we want to do is we want to make it more personal. How do we relate to this idea of the breaking of the vessels? And how is it manifest in our own lives? And so today we will introduce many ideas, and we'll try to make it personal. And then next week, we will look at Shvirat Hakeilim and the worlds of chaos and rectification from a more Kabbalistic point of view. And then the third week, we will be into the 9 days. We'll be very close to the fast of Tisha B'Av. And we will take all these concepts and relate them to Tisha B'Av. In a certain sense, Tisha B'Av is the what we could call the low point of the year. So much so we actually sit on the floor in the dark and light candles, which we don't do any other time of the year, because it represents like the low point of the year. But as we will discuss more, already by the afternoon of Tisha B'Av, there's a lot of hope and anticipation for Mashiach and the final redemption. So that will be our 3-week mini series. So a quick review. As I said, next week we will go into this in much more depth. The idea of Shvirat Hakeilim. So I'm going to give it over in what's called a nutshell, and we will expand it. But here, just in case people don't really understand this concept or need a short refresher. So according to the Arizal, that when God wanted to create the world, as it were, there was no place for a finite world. There was only the infinite light of God. And even though it might sound like, what's the problem? But philosophically, how does infinite create a space for finite reality? And so the Ari explains this idea of tzimtzum, of contraction, that God contracted his infinite being in order to make space for a finite reality. Chassidut explains that even though God contracted his infinite being, there was always an impression, even in the what was called the vacuum, excuse me, that no place can be absolutely empty of God's presence. And into this vacuum, that would be the place for finite worlds and ultimately our physical material world, God shone a ray of light, and this began the creation of the worlds. We'll discuss this evolution of worlds more next week. But we're told that the previous world, and there were worlds before that, but the previous world is called Olam Tohu, and the lights were tremendously powerful lights and immature vessels. And so therefore, the immature vessels shattered, broke. That's what's called the breaking of the vessels. And from the broken vessels of the previous world are the raw material for this present world, which is called the world of rectification. Again, we are going to go into this much more. That's just a review of what we're talking about here. So the previous world is called the world of Tohu, world of chaos. And this world, the Ari called the world of rectification. And the theme, we have this concept called Tikkun Olam, of rectifying the world, fixing the world, healing the world. So this is because this world is made up of the broken vessels of a previous world. So I want to look at the last verse of the Torah and the last Rashi, and then we're going to connect it to the first 2 verses of the Torah. And so we could see where these concepts are alluded to in the Torah itself. So the Rashi explains that the Torah ends that with this idea that all of the miracles and wonders that Moshe did in the eyes of all of Israel. That's how the Torah ends. Moshe passes away, and the Torah ends that there was never a prophet like Moshe again. And he did all these wonders and miracles in the eyes of all of Israel. So if one would not read Rashi, one would think that it's talking about Moshe when he split the Red Sea, when Moshe, he was the conduit. God was doing it, but Moshe was the agent through which the 10 plagues happened, and miracle after miracle. He brought water from the rock, even though the last time, instead of speaking to it, he hit it, but he still brought water. So that's what we would think, all the miracles and wonders that Moshe did in the eyes of all of Israel. Rashi says something totally unexpected. Rashi says, what is this great miracle that Moshe did? He broke the tablets. He broke the tablets of the law. So that's not something that we would think of. And he says that when God is mentioning to Moshe about the broken tablets, and he says about the luchot, asher shibarta, that you broke. And so the sages read it, say, don't read it that you broke, read it, yesher kochacha asher shibarta. Good job, Moshe, yesher koyach, that you broke the tablets. This is the last Rashi, and it's like, whoa, what is Rashi trying to tell us here? What is so special about the breaking of the tablets? Now we'll add here that this is a well-known explanation that we should take the last verse of the Torah and connect it to the first verse and actually read it as if it's one verse. So the last 3 words of the Torah are Be'enei Kol Yisrael, and then it says Bereshit bara Elokim et Shemaim v'et haaretz. But if you put them together, you read it, in the eyes of all of Israel, God in the beginning created the heavens and the earth. And so here we see an amazing thing that is being alluded to. Now, the big question is, did Rashi fully understand the implication of what he was saying? We have a general idea that, first of all, we have a tradition that Rashi wrote his commentary with Ruach HaKodesh, with what's called divine inspiration. And we're told that when a prophet or someone with divine inspiration says something, they're not always aware of the full implication because they're drawing from a much higher source, and they may not even be aware of everything that it implies. So here, when we just gave over the Ari's cosmology, that before this world is created, the Ari says very clearly, when it says Bereshit bara Elokim et Shemaim v'et haaretz, it means that this is the beginning of Olam HaTikkun, the world of rectification. The second verse of the Torah begins V'ha'aretz hayta tohu v'vohu, that the earth was chaotic, implying the previous world. So here we see an amazing allusion in the Torah for the idea that before the world of rectification was the world of Tohu, and in that world, the vessels broke. A further teaching that's always given over is that the last letter of the Torah is a Lamed, and the first letter of the Torah is a Bet, which spells Lev, heart. And we have a concept, and we will probably be mentioning this a couple of times, is there's nothing as whole as a broken heart. And so here we see that the idea of the breaking of the vessels is not, as it were, a mistake. The Gemara actually says in highly symbolic terms that God created 974 worlds and destroyed every one of them until this world. Now, this is not easy to understand, but if we just look at some examples, we'll be able to understand this on a deeper level. And the way we're going to do this is we're going to look at the word Shever. Shvirat Hakeilim means breaking the vessels. So anytime in the Torah, if we want to understand a word, a concept, a name, we look at what is the root word and what does it mean. So we have Shvirat Hakeilim means the breaking of the vessels. But what does the word Shever actually mean? So it's true. Shever means to break, to destroy, but it also means to provide and to sustain. So this is a bit paradoxical. The same word represents breaking, but also sustaining. Where do we see that? We see that in the story of when Yosef is in Egypt, and he already is second in command after he gave the advice to Pharaoh to save grain for 7 years during the years of plenty, and that he prophesied or predicted that then there would be 7 years of famine. So when the famine finally hit, so it says in the Torah that Yaakov sent his sons down to Egypt, and he said, I see there's Shever in Egypt. And there it means I see there's food. I see that there's sustenance for us in Egypt. Go down and bring us back some grain because we're in the midst of a famine. Some say that, like we said about Rashi, that he was prophesying without even knowing it, because he says, I see Shever, which also means I see a breaking, I see slavery coming. And both of those are true. Both of those are true. So now that we have a definition for Shever, so we can understand a little bit more this idea of Shvirat Hakeilim, and especially in our own lives. And some examples are, first of all, a woman giving birth is connected to the word mashbir, which is connected to Yosef. Yosef is called Hamashbir, the provider. And in fact, the first department store in Israel was called the Mashbir. You go to get what you need, what could be provided for you. And so also, a woman, what's called the birthing stool, is the same word, is from the root shever. And a woman cannot give birth until what's in English we even call it the breaking of the waters. Until her waters break, she can't. That's the sign that the birth is imminent. And yet, what comes from the birth pangs is a holy soul, a new soul, a baby. So here we have the whole theme of exile and redemption that runs through the whole Torah, and of darkness and light, exile and redemption. And here we have Shvirat Hakeilim, but it provides the raw materials of something that will come after it. And here we could look at two examples: a tree. And of course, we're talking about all of nature, but we'll have a tree. Let's say the fruit isn't picked. So the fruit eventually will fall to the ground. The leaves will eventually, for those kind of trees that lose their leaves in the fall, they'll lose their leaves. And then when the rain comes, and in the course of the winter, all of that gets worked into the earth, and that becomes the ingredients, that becomes the fertilizer for the next year's growth. We could also look, that's like in the microcosm. In the macrocosm, we are told that there would be no life on Earth if stars explode, they die, and when they explode, they spew their elements into the cosmos. And that life on Earth, there's the expression, we are stardust. Well, this is, it's like poetic, but it's quite literal. So here's two examples of, an exploding star is like, whoa, what a incredible burst of energy in this, and the star is now gone, it's dead. And yet, it is part of what makes the universe what it is. So this is this idea of Shvirat Hakeilim. It wasn't a mistake. And the 974 worlds that God created and destroyed was it. I don't even know if destroyed is the right word. It's just it was a process of evolution. Now, this applies to every person because almost 24/7, we are going through constant challenges, constant experiences when the light appears to us, or we experience it as being too much for us. That's how the breaking of the vessels is described, that the lights were tremendous in Olam Tohu, but the vessels were not strong enough. They were not fitting. They were not prepared to receive this light, and so they shattered. So, like I said in the beginning, we want to make this more personal. So here's a string of expressions that we all use at different times, depending on our cultural influences, but they are real experiences of Shvirat Hakeilim in our own lives. So some of the examples are, I'm freaking out. I can't handle this. This is too much for me. I got to get out of here. I need some space. I'm not ready for this. Now, these are expressions that we all use or think at different times when, depending on the circumstances of what's happening in our lives, it's just too much for us. In other words, the light is too much for our emotional, intellectual, psychological vessels at that particular moment. And so we express our frustration or our lack of ability to handle the tension of the moment. And so many times stress is coming from these situations where we don't feel we can handle it. And we are like, we're not stable. We're overwhelmed. So this is a very, very important perspective of taking what could be thought of just like a cosmological, mystical, Kabbalistic of idea of how this world somehow was created. But the idea is that Shvirat Hakeilim is not, just like anything else in the Torah, is not a one-time event that happened. It is part and parcel of our lives. This we'll discuss more. We'll discuss this more. I'm sure everyone is familiar with the end of the stanza that I'm going to give over now from Leonard Cohen. The whole stanza is from, I believe it's his song Anthem. I might be wrong. Someone could put in the chat if that's not the name of the song. But he says like this: ring the bells that still can ring. Forget your perfect offering. There is a crack in everything. That's how the light gets in. That's how the light gets in. So I should just mention, many people don't know this, that Leonard Cohen was always, despite the fact that many times in his life he veered pretty far away from what we call a traditional Jewish lifestyle, to the point that he spent 6 years in a Buddhist monastery. But he was always connected to his Judaism. You can hear it in his songs. And there was a period in his life that he did serious study in Kabbalah and Chassidut. And you see it expressed throughout his life, and especially his last few years. He came back very, very, very much. And it's known that his last song was Hineni. And he knew he was about to die. And he actually, 30 days after this song was officially released, he passed away. And the refrain is, Hineni, Hineni, I'm ready, my Lord. And he used the choir from the same synagogue that he grew up in Montreal. And in the song, the chazan and the choir are singing in Hebrew. It's just an amazing thing. But the idea here is Leonard Cohen was saying exactly what we're saying in poetic terms. There's a crack in everything. That's how the light gets in. This is not a perfect world. We all know that very, very, very well. But we can either be broken by the imperfection and the problems of this world, or we can learn to live with it and see the sparks of light that are in everything. And that's what we're told about Shvirat Hakeilim. When the vessels broke, so there was light in the vessels, and the light fell with the vessels, and the Ari taught, and it became a fundamental idea in Chassidut, that our mission in the world, our job, especially the Jewish people, is to identify these sparks of light that are everywhere, and to redeem them and to bring them back into holiness, and eventually to bring them back to Eretz Yisrael, and from Eretz Yisrael, with all of the redeemed light, that will pave the way for the Messianic era. So now, just going back to the 3 weeks and the whole concept of breaking. So again, Yud Zayin B'Tammuz, the first fast day, was the idea of breaking of the Luchot. It culminates with Tisha B'Av, which is the breaking of the temples. We usually call it the destruction of the temples, but we could use the same term, the breaking of the temples. But there's also two other incidences that are very, very important to understand that they were also a breaking of the vessels. And that is Adam and Eve in the Garden of Eden. Here we have the first two human beings in what we'll call a utopian state. The Garden of Eden represents, as it were, in potential, a perfect situation for human beings. And we always use the phrase or the idea that we want to get back to the garden, that when the Mashiach comes, it will be like going back to the garden. But we see that Adam and Eve, it was too much light for them. It was like, it was too much. So how can we relate to this? We could relate to it sometimes for some people, even on Shabbat. When you get already to third meal, so many people are, like already thinking of what we're doing Motzi Shabbos, and all of the problems start coming back. But for many people, it's just like a whole day of peace is, I'm not used to that. I'm used to, 24/6. And you see it a lot of times when you have 2 days of Yantif, and then it runs into Shabbat. And you have 3 days in a row. So for a lot of people, it's not easy. It's not easy because people are tuned into a nonstop world. And Shabbos is great, but now 2 or 3 days, wow. I'm not saying everyone has this problem or this challenge, but I'm just throwing this out as an example of that we could relate to, that so much light is sometimes not easy to handle. Not easy to handle. The other idea that's connected, it's not exact, but when God made a covenant with Avram, it's called the covenant of the pieces. This is when Avram wanted to know who's going to inherit me. How is this whole story going to end? And God revealed to him many, many things, and it's called the covenant of the pieces, where Avram cut up the animals and he put them on 2 sides, and he passed through. But it was like as it were, the animals were being broken. That's why it's called the covenant of the pieces. It's like the broken pieces. And that's where God revealed to him that your children will be slaves, and they will be oppressed for 4 generations, 400 years. And eventually they will come out and will return to Israel. So this is also a type of Shvirat Hakeilim that God was revealing to Avram, that this is the destiny of the Jewish people. Now, going back, we started this idea with this Rashi, this last Rashi, of alluding to this idea that the breaking of the Luchot was alluding to the breaking of the vessels happening even before Bereshit. And this is like on Simchas Torah, where we end the Torah And we immediately begin the Torah again from the beginning. And that's why many commentaries say, connect the end of the Torah with the beginning. In the eyes of all of Israel, in the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. Now, if we go to the last words of creation on the seventh day, which is Asher bara Elokim la'asot, that God made to do. That's how the what's called Shabbos Bereshit ends. So everyone asks, what is that last word doing? It's redundant. That God made, period. What does it mean? God made to do. So it's explained that to do here, la'asot, also means to fix, to rectify. And so the last word of creation is to rectify. And we're told that the significance of this is telling the Jewish people and mankind what their role in the world is. That creation was not a one-time deal, and we have now a perfect creation, and Shalom al Yisrael. What else is there to do? It ends with to do, because just like we're saying that Shvirat Hakeilim was not a mistake, it was part of the process of the kind of world that God wanted to create in order that we could become images of God. Because if God wanted to hand everything to us on a golden platter, and we would just be like marionettes in a puppet show, well, what is the purpose of creation? So we learn, and this is a very, very important idea, that God, by giving us free will, was telling us that in order to become a Tselem Elokim, we have to learn to use our free will in a proper way. Now, there's no free gifts here. When you earn it, it's yours. And that's why the Zohar calls something that is acquired without working for it is called bread of shame. In other words, God set up a world that we have to earn our way, but when we earn our way, it's ours. It becomes ours. And that, by doing that, that's how we rectify the world. And so the last word of creation is la'asot, is to do. And we're also told by the sages that we are meant to be partners with God in creation. That's why creation is not considered a one-time event and a done deal, especially when we look at a seemingly very imperfect world, where there's a lot of what we will call evil. So obviously these are very challenging ideas. And there's no doubt that at different times we may cry out to God and like, why did you make the world this way? And in fact, I learned this from Rav Ginsburg, when God chooses Moshe and sends him back to Egypt to save the Jewish people. So he tells him to go to Paro and do a couple of miracles. But he already told them that Paro is not going to listen to you. Nonetheless, Moshe goes, and Paro says, well, my magicians can do that also. I don't know your God. I'm not letting you go. And not only that, Now you have to collect your own straw, and you still have to make the same amount of bricks. And so Moshe comes out, and he's confronted by Datan and Aviram, who say to Moshe, like, you're the Redeemer. It's worse now than ever. And Moshe goes back to God. That's how the parshat of Shemot ends. Moshe goes to God and say, why have you done evil to this people? And why have you sent me? From the time I came, things are worse. And so Rav Ginsburg explains that already at the burning bush, Moshe was told that Pharaoh won't listen the first time, and that there will be all of these plagues and miracles, and eventually he will let you go. So the question is, what was Moshe questioning God about? What is the question? Why have you done evil to this people? But when we look at Moshe, Moshe had tremendous compassion on the people. And when he saw the people were going to suffer from what he had just done, so it was like, God, why did you send me? So Rav Ginsburg said what he was really asking was like this. In a sense, the deepest question in the world. He was saying to God, God, I understand this concept of first exile and then redemption. First the darkness and the light. First the Shvirat, first the breaking, and then the rectification. But you're God. You could make the world any way you want it to be. So why do you have to make it so hard on us? So I think probably everyone at some point in their life has probably turned to God with the same question. Like, God, I have faith in you and I'm doing my best, but like, does it really have to be so hard? And during the 3 weeks, that's why I chose this topic. These are the 3 weeks to really think about this, to really contemplate. And in fact, in the keynote of Tisha B'Av, there are a whole series of keynote are these very sorrowful and painful poetry about Jewish history, and some of it is very graphic and very difficult to read. Just like some of the words of the prophets are very difficult to read. They're horrific descriptions of what will happen if we don't do what we're supposed to do. But some of them also have this theme of, God, did you really have to make it this hard? Or the Lubavitcher Rebbe, in many, many different Farbrengens, would cry out, Rabbonu Shalom, ad matai? Ad matai? Now, these are not expressions of a lack of faith. This is really like Avram, when he says to God over the whole incident with Sodom, and the whole city is going to be destroyed. And Avram is, well, if there are tzaddikim there, how can you destroy the whole city with the tzaddikim? And he said to God, how can the God of righteousness not do righteousness? So these are not questions of a lack of faith. In a almost paradoxical way, it's our belief in the compassion of God. And then when we don't see it, it's like painful for us. It's like painful. So just to wrap up tonight, I want to mention just one other thing where this theme comes in very, very strongly. And that is in Seder night, in the Haggadah. The Haggadah, we have 15 steps to the Haggadah. That's what Seder means. Seder means the order of how we conduct the Seder of Pesach, and how we incorporate all of the mitzvot of the night from the Torah and from the rabbis, the 4 cups of wine and the matzah and the moror and dipping in the salt water and all the things that we do. So the 4th step is called yachatz, which means breaking in half. It's breaking. So there are many explanations of the order of the Seder, but one of them is that the first 3, Kadesh, Urchatz, Karpas. Kadesh means sanctify. Kadesh, Urchatz means to wash, but with water signifies purity. So we're told that the first 2 steps is the desire to connect to holiness and purity. In Hebrew, kedusha v'tahara. And the 3rd, karpas, is eating a green vegetable. So we're told that the first 3 steps, again, this is just one of many, many different explanations. The first 3, as it were, is going back to the Garden of Eden, where everything was holy and pure, and everything was green and beautiful. And then we get to yachatz. And this is Adam and Eve having to leave the garden. This is the breaking of the luchot. This is the covenant of the pieces. This is the destruction of the temples. This is the brokenness of all of history. And the brokenness of each and every person has a bit of brokenness. And then what do? We break the matzah in half, but there's a bigger piece and a smaller piece, and we take the bigger piece and we hide it until the end of the Seder. And then in the step called safun, which means hidden, depending on the custom, the children bring the matzah back to the table. And this represents everything we've talked about tonight. That yachatz is the breaking of the vessels. And then we go through all of Jewish history. And then once we get to the meal and Hallel, we're in a redemptive mode. And that's when we bring back Safun, which represents the hidden reasons for all of the brokenness. And that will lead to the redemption and Mashiach. So here we have the whole idea of exile, redemption, darkness and light, and breaking of the vessels, and the world of rectification that will follow. So this is a good place to conclude for tonight. For those who came in later, we will be continuing on this theme for 2 more weeks. During the 3 weeks, we'll be discussing different aspects. Next week, we're going to look more Kabbalistically into the world of Tohu, the world of Tikkun, and Shvirat Hakeilim, more from different allusions in the Torah, different connections with the Shvirat, with different incidences in the Torah. And then the 3rd week, as we get close to Tisha B'Av, we will bring in more ideas related to the breaking of the vessels. So we'll end with a blessing that Bezrat Hashem, that from the breaking of Jewish history, from the breaking that each and every one of us experiences sometime in our life, that from that will come healing and completeness. Like we said, that there's nothing as whole as a broken heart.